Welcome back to the Flutes channel. I'm your host, Flutes, and it is an evening or afternoon or morning of book triggers, gripping, tapping, page turning, while I review the books, some of them, that I read this year. I will keep my reviews brief. I will read the synopsis, and I will give it a rating, 1 out of 10. However, my views are a bit opinionated based on my preferences, so please keep that in mind. Being able to create something that another person can read, digest, and visualize simply from looking at words on a page takes so much time and effort. So with that being said, all books get 10 of 10s, and then they get opinions. We're starting first with Wild. There's a boot on the cover, a hiking boot, a brown hiking boot with red laces. Wild. The synopsis for Wild. At 22, Cheryl strayed, thought she had lost everything. In the wake of her mother's death, her family scattered, and her own marriage was soon destroyed. 4 years later, with nothing more to lose, she made the most impulsive decision of her life. With no experience or training, driven only by blind will, she would hike more than 1,000 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. From the Moshfegh Desert, through California and Oregon, to Washington State, and she would do it alone. Wild. I sobbed like a baby at the beginning of this book, but towards the middle it lost a bit of steam, and I felt that she kept traveling back in time to revisit her past, instead of describing the exquisite nature that had to have been surrounding her during this journey, this trek. She had to have been isolated in pristine wilderness conditions, but the nature isn't mentioned very often in this book. It goes into frequent flashbacks of her personal history and sufferings, but she never seems to reach a full circle in integration from her time spent in the wilderness. And with few plot points, it feels like this backtrack through time is something she really relies upon in order to move the story forward. But it leaves you feeling like a lot more had to have happened out there that she could have expounded upon. According to her, she had never really even hiked before. So this was her first time with no prior experience, a backpack she couldn't lift, shoes that made her toenails fall off. But we don't really get that fix that we are looking for, especially when they marketed the book as this woman hikes the Pacific Crest Trail. So I would give this book a 6 out of 10. I feel like that's being generous. 6 because the beginning was very strong. So I can't reduce it to a 5. Wild. Next up, we have America by Baudrillard. On the cover of America, we see a family seemingly from the 60s in what appears to be something like the Salton Sea. The most important French thinker of the past 20 years In America, France's leading philosopher of postmodernism takes to the freeways in a collection of travelers' tales from the land of hyperreality. From the Sierras of New Mexico to the streets of New York and LA by night, a sort of luminous, geometric, incandescent immensity, Baudrillard mixes apropos and observations with a wicked sense of fun to provide a unique insight into the country that dominates our world. America. According to Baudrillard, the real has vanished into images of itself, and we now live in a simulation or a simulacra, where glinting surfaces reflect each other and nothing is as it seems. It's merely a regurgitation of what we've seen before, what's been fed to us to view and to believe. For example, we cannot look at the desert, supposedly, without seeing what's been shown to us through movies and through cinema. We only view it through the lens of influence, what you've seen in a commercial, an ad, a movie, heard about in a song. Therefore, we don't have real thoughts or feelings. They're all based off of what we've been spoon-fed, essentially. I give this an 8.5. It's supposedly his easiest read. The information he presents is so important to society, but the way he presents it is very dense, wordy, or verbose. I connected, but I felt he could summarize everything he was saying in about 10 pages. I also wanted a bit more poetic flair because he has that kick to him, but it was far and few between. America. And next up we have Rogues. Rogues. True stories of grifters, killers, rebels, and crooks by Radden Keefe. Rogues. Radden Keefe has garnered prizes ranging from the National Magazine Award to the Orwell Prize to the National Book Critics Circle Award for his meticulously reported, hypnotically engaging work on the many ways people behave badly. Rogues brings together a dozen of his most celebrated articles from the New Yorker. As Keefe says in his preface, they reflect on some of my abiding preoccupations: crime and corruption, secrets and lies, the permeable membrane, separating licit and illicit worlds, the bonds of the family, the power of denial. Keefe brilliantly explores the intricacies of forging $150,000 vintage wines, examines whether a whistleblower who dared to expose money laundering at a Swiss bank is a hero or a fabulist, spends time in Vietnam with Anthony Bourdain, chronicles the quest to bring down a cheerful international black market arms merchant, and profiles a passionate death penalty attorney who represents the worst of the worst, among other rougher works of literary journalism. It's Rogues. This is not a typical book that I am drawn to, and there were a few essays I had to skip because of violence and gore. I can't handle that. But very fascinating, especially the essay on the capture of El Capo and the making of Donald Trump. I would give this book a 9 out of 10. Definitely worth reading, and with such variety and criminal activity, you're going to be entertained and stunned. Rogues. Next up, The Boys of My Youth by Joanne Beard. There's a Ferris wheel on the cover, as you can see. cousins, mothers, sisters, dolls, dogs, best friends. These are the fixed points in Joanne Beard's universe. The constants that remain when the boys of her youth and the men who replace them are gone. This widely praised collection of autobiographical essays summons back with astonishing grace and power moments of childhood epiphany, as well as the cataclysms of adult life, betrayal, divorce, death. It is a book that heralds the arrival of an immensely gifted and original writer. The boys of my youth, Joanne Beard. Even reading that last line gave me tingles in my stomach and chest. Whenever there's an impressive body of work, my whole body erupts in this duende, I think it's called. And this woman did an exceptional job with this book. There's a particular essay in here called The Fourth State of Matter, and holy moly, I have chills even saying and thinking about it. The style, the attention to detail, the themes, the fact that it was autobiographical. I'm not going to cry. I want to. It's an excellent example of how to shape a short story. Fiction or nonfiction, take notes. 9 out of 10. The Voice of My Youth, Joanne Beard. Next is The Art of Memoir. We're getting some good covers. We have the colors black and red on the cover. In The Art of Memoir, master memoirist Mary Karr, I think I said Mary Karr earlier, synthesizes her expertise as professor and therapy patient, writer and spiritual seeker, recovered alcoholic, and black belt sinner, providing a unique window into the mechanics and art of the form that is as irreverent, insightful, and entertaining as her own work in the genre. Anchored by excerpts from her favorite memoirs and anecdotes from fellow writers' experience, The Art of Memoir lays bare Karr's own process as she breaks down the key elements of great literary memoir. The Art of Memoir, Mary Karr. For a book on memoir, the voice is very conversational, charming, hilarious at times, and I found myself taking notes and marking pages because she made a lot of key points. However, I found that it didn't go as in-depth as I wanted it to. It was a bit surface for me at times. I will read one of the marked pages so you get a taste of her chapters. Let's see. Alright, so chapter 9 is titled Interiority and Inner Enemy. Private agonies read deeper than external whammies. I think that that's a given, but it's not something that I ever fully processed before. That what the character is experiencing internally, that agony, the pain, the suffering, is much more relatable and gripping than whatever action is taking place in the plot. And she has some profound nuggets. The first sentence of this chapter is, carnality may determine whether a memoir's any good, but interiority, that kingdom the camera never captures, makes a book readable. Chills. Art of Memoir, while I did just sing its praises, I would give a 7 out of 10 because it left something to be desired. But I think this is worth reading, especially if someone wants a light book on how to write memoir. Now, we have Girlhood by Melissa Febos. On the cover, you see Girlhood in white, the color of purity, slowly becoming erased as it grows more and more pink, suggesting the menstrual cycle, I would imagine, and then reaching her full name at the bottom. A very thoughtful cover. When her body started to change at 11 years old, Melissa Febos immediately understood that her meaning to other people had changed with it. By her teens, she had defined herself accordingly by outside expectations. Over time, she questioned the stories she'd been told about being female, asking why they had so devalued her personal safety, happiness, and freedom. Blending investigative reporting, memoir, and scholarship, Febos charts how she and others like her have reframed the narrative, reimagined relationships, and made room for the grief, power, and pleasure women have long been taught to deny. This is a philosophical treatise, an anthem, and a searing study of the transitions into and away from girlhood, into a chosen self. I was not expecting something this heavy. I'm very grateful that I read it. It was, like it said on the back cover, a very scholarly read, and I felt at times that she was relying a bit too much on the scholasticism. Again, this is just me. I wanted more of her. She experienced a lot of trauma growing up, and in reading this, it really spurred me to reflect on my own girlhood and consider how women are raised to think about their bodies and how the situations shift once puberty hits. So the book largely focuses on how gender reality is created through sustained social performance. And because of that, there were a few quotes that set me on my heels, and I actually wrote them down so I could share them. In what ways have you collaborated in the mistreatment of your own body? You must turn on the lights and welcome every part of yourself into the room. However painful, we often cherish our own self-hatreds and mistake them as intrinsic to our survival. I thought both of those points were very powerful, and it brought up a lot of thoughts that I hadn't considered. So I give this an 8 out of 10 for the thoughts it invoked, but I would not read it again. Girlhood. Now we have Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. You can see I've got some pages marked in here. Bird by Bird. Anne Lamott. There's a bird on the cover. Because bird by bird. The point of the book is that no matter what, you continue to write one foot in front of the other. Bird by bird. For a quarter century, more than 1 million readers, scribes, and scribblers of all ages and abilities have been inspired by Anne Lamott's lively, big-hearted, homespun advice. Advice that begins with the simple words of wisdom passed down from Anne's father, also a writer, in the iconic passage that gives the book its title. 30 years ago, my older brother, who was 10 years old at the time, was trying to get a report on birds written that he'd had 3 months to write, which was due the next day. We were out at our family cabin in Bolinas, and he was at the kitchen table close to tears, surrounded by binder paper and pencils and unopened books on birds, immobilized by the hugeness of the task ahead. Then my father sat down beside him, put his arm around my brother's shoulder and said, "Bird by bird, buddy. Just take it bird by bird." An essential volume for generations of writers, young and old. Bird by Bird is a modern classic. Bird by Bird. Anne Lamott. If you want to write a memoir, read this book. This is the one, baby. This is the one to read. I took no And she doesn't beat around the bush, although a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, right? When it comes to the pain and suffering inflicted upon the self when one undertakes the process of writing. This came at a time when I was deep in the throes of that, so I felt seen and heard and far from alone, thank God. If you're writing a memoir, like I said, read this book. She also describes writing as a spiritual experience, so I could get behind that. 9 out of 10. Right here. I don't give any book a 10 out of 10 unless it is mind-blowing. And there are quite a few books that have hit that mark. Oh, man. Travels with Charley, John Steinbeck. I've got thoughts on this one. On the cover, you see a sun, a winding road, a vast meadow, and down here his method of transportation. John Steinbeck and his poodle. A quest across America, from the northernmost tip of Maine to California's Monterey Peninsula, to hear the speech of the real America, to smell the grass and the trees, to see the colors and the light. These were John Steinbeck's goals as he set out at the age of 58 to rediscover the country he had been writing about for so many years. With Charley, his French poodle, Steinbeck drives the interstates and the country roads, dines with truckers, encounters bears at Yellowstone and old friends in San Francisco, and he reflects on the American character, on racial hostility, on a particular form of American loneliness he finds almost everywhere, and on the unexpected kindness of strangers that is also a very real part of America's national identity. Travels with Charley. I was severely disappointed. I was expecting much more from the man who wrote East of Eden. This is my hot take. Johnny Steinbeck said, I have a brilliant idea. I want to hit the road. I want to get paid for it. It's going to be amazing. And by the end, he was just wanting that paycheck. He wanted to get this book done, and so he filled half of it with tales of his poodle. The most excitement that happens in this book is before he leaves. To be on the road for that long. Why are we getting such intense descriptions about your poodle? And what your poodle was allergic to? There were only a few moments of true adventure in this book, and I lived for them. So, I give this book a 5. I would not recommend it. It's no On the Road. Although I really wish there were more books like On the Road. I'm hungry for those. On the Road by Jack Kerouac, by the way, in case you haven't read it. It took me a while, and I didn't like it at first. So, preferences on books change with age. Maybe I will love this at 58. I hope not. Another book that seems like it was written to cash a paycheck is My Invented Country by Isabel, Allende, which is gut-wrenching because she's the author of perhaps my favorite book, The House of Spirits. This is a memoir. That was fiction. She gave us a good cover, though. On the cover you have the topography of Chile and husband and wife in this wondrous this an intimate book, Isabel Allende explores the role of memory and nostalgia in shaping her life, her books, and that most intimate connection to her place of origin. My Invented Country brings her homeland of Chile to life in her unique voice, evoking the magnificent landscapes of her land, the almost mythic people of her family, the tragedy and hope of her people, and the politics, religion, and magic that infuse them all. My Invented Country orbits two life-changing moments: the 1973 assassination of her uncle, President Salvador Allende, which sent her into exile and inspired her literary career, and the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 on her adopted homeland, the United States. Ranging back and forth across distance and time between past and present lives, it is a monumental tribute to history and the immigrant experience, and a wise and personal exploration of what it means to pursue a reflective life in a world full of contradictions. My Invented Country. It didn't seem like too much thought went into this book. It read like it was rushed, but it was nice to get some insight on her life and how she formed the basis of her books. I really enjoyed learning that she did not write House of Spirits until she was 45, and for about 6 years before that, she wrote every day and then crumpled up everything she wrote and threw it away. It wasn't until, I believe, her grandfather died that she sat down and wrote House of Spirits for an entire year straight, and that's how that book was made. Being able to get clued into that process was worth the read for me. However, I give it a 7, and it's only a 7 because I love House of Spirits. Otherwise, it would probably be a 6, and I would just say, don't waste your time on this book, but do go and read House of Spirits. Priority. Make that a priority. That book is phenomenal. All right, we're down to 3 books left. The Second Sex. Simone de Beauvoir. It's a thick one. Just keeps going. That's how it felt when I was reading it. Hefty. Wow. So we have The Second Sex. The cover is a bit dry for me. I like the book a little bit. But you see, second is blurred out. A little hard to see. This is basically a feminist manifesto. I did not realize it when I bought it. And as you can see, The Second Sex, females, blurred. You can't really see them because they were supposed to be unseen. Newly translated and unabridged in English for the first time. Simone de Beauvoir's masterwork is a powerful analysis of the Western notion of the woman in quotes, and a groundbreaking exploration of inequality and otherness. This long-awaited new edition reinstates significant portions of the original French text that were cut in the first English translation. Vital and groundbreaking, Beauvoir's pioneering and impressive text remains as pertinent today as it was 60 years ago, and will continue to provoke and inspire generations of men and women to come. The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir. It depressed me. There were days I just couldn't get out of bed. That's being a little dramatic, but there were definitely hours where I had to reorient my perspective. I think I was ignorant about the repression of the feminine, and this, I could no longer run or hide. It put into clear view why women are paid less. I'm not going to go into that now, but I thought that was fascinating to find out. I had to force myself to read 50 pages a day of this because I felt it was important to read. But it was very dense, and like Jean Baudrillard, it could have been summed up in half the time. It was a slog, and it was an important read. So I give it an 8 out of 10 because it's such an important read, but it can't go any higher because you don't want to be counting the pages down when you're reading a book. And we have Hell's Angels. Loved so hard, the cover is gone. By Hunter S. Thompson. You can tell he's a favorite. I can't do too much here, or else the pages will fall off. So as you can see from this cover, it's a loved book. Hell's Angels. The barbarians are no longer the city gates. They are in the city. And Hunter Thompson, America's most brazen and ballsy journalist, tells their story as no one else can. Hell's Angels takes the reader inside the most notorious of California's motorcycle gangs, an animal crowd on big wheels, all noise and hair and bust-out raping instinct. In eloquent, forceful detail, he describes their machines, runs, codes, origin, and recent history and day-to-day experience. This is a fascinating book, but not one for the queasy. Hell's Angels, Hunter S. Thompson. It's not as titillating as Fear and Loathing, but Hunter S. Thompson is a legend. And the fact that he went through so much exposure to the Hells Angels in order to write this book, mad props. The first 100 pages is grinding because he's laying all the facts out for you. He's crossing his T's and dotting his I's. But once it gets into his true voice and style and he can relax a bit, you know what I'm saying? If you haven't read Hunter S. Thompson, go read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I never saw the movie, but the book, his voice and style. This gets a 9.5 out of 10 because of all it entailed in order to write it. I would recommend it. No one has an account of Hell's Angels like he does. And finally, Homesick for Another World by Ottessa Moshfegh. On the cover you see a flying spacecraft or UFO. The title and the photo are what drew me to the book. I will tell you that much. I was a bit let down when I realized that the cover had no bearing on the contents of the book. There's something eerily unsettling about Ottessa Moshfegh's stories, almost dangerous, while also being delightful and funny. The characters in this highly anticipated debut collection are unsteady on their feet. They yearn for connection and betterment, but are often tripped up by their own baser impulses and existential insecurities. Yet, in Moshfegh's unique voice, the grotesque and the outrageous are infused with tenderness and compassion. The flesh is weak, the timber is crooked, and people are cruel to each other, stupid and hurtful. But beauty comes from strange sources, and the dark energy surging through these stories is powerfully invigorating. So not only the cover, but also the way people were writing about this book sold me. The stories get better the deeper you go. She does not write about likable characters. She prefers more grotesque stories and detached characters. A lot of critics say that this is a dark book. I didn't find it too disturbing. She definitely describes aspects of the human body in vivid detail and has a bit of a fixation on fat. There are several great short stories in here. The rest are not remarkable or memorable, which is saying something because this is my December book. The Beach Boy and Dancing in the Moonlight are the stories I recommend. Overall, I would give this a 6 out of 10, and I'd recommend it only for those short stories. And that completes this book review. Thank you for joining me. Please let me know if you have read any of these and what your thoughts were on them. And if you have any good recommendations for future books, let